This project shows you how to make a Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer Christmas decoration. Although it's based on Rudolph, you could adapt this design to go into any other Christmas decoration or into a decoration for other times of the year. What we've got underneath here in the cheek area is a little push switch that when I push it with my finger, the light underneath the nose comes on, just highlighting this sort of area here. This item's made from scratch, so you will need some basic textile skills. So being able to do the embroidery stitches, sewing a button on, sewing a popper on, and using a basic pattern. So it's probably designed for somebody who's got intermediate level skills, particularly as the circuit that's inside does require a little bit of knowledge of how to create a circuit. The circuit's actually underneath this section just here, and it's got a little PCB LED that sits under the surface, and the switch is just in his cheek, so when you push the cheek the light comes on. And you can see the circuit just inside here if I just open this popper. So there it is tucked away inside, and obviously this little bottom bit here that opens allows you to change the battery if you need to. First of all, you'll need to download the paper pattern and just cut out each of these pattern shapes. You're also going to need some felt fabric, although you could use other fabrics. I quite like using felt for Christmas decorations because you'll see a lot of Christmas decorations made out of this sort of fabric in the shops. You can buy it in quite small squares like this one, or you can buy it by the metre. We're going to need some embroidery threads. So I've got some stranded embroidery threads here, but you could use any type of embroidery threads. You could also sew your hanger together using a sewing machine. We're going to need some cushion stuffing, so we're going to pad the cushion slightly, as well as a little piece of ribbon, so about 20 centimetres long, and some ordinary sewing thread. And the last few bits and pieces that we'll need, materials and components wise, are a couple of buttons. I've got black buttons here, but they could be other colours, and a small popper. For our circuit, we're going to need a standard cell holder, along with the cell that goes with it. We're going to need a PCB LED. I've got a white one here, but you could use other colours, and a push switch. And then to join all your circuit together, a reel of conductive thread. So I've taken my paper pattern and cut around each of the pieces, and then taken the pattern pieces and just pinned them onto a backing fabric. All I've done is just looked at the instructions as to how many I need to cut and where I need to position things. So for this one, this is the front of the reindeer, and this is the back piece. For this particular one, I've just chosen to do two different colours. Just notice that here the hole, so if you see on the original pattern, it says to cut the hole out, so there is a gap. That's where our LED is going to show through, and the same on the snout just here, another gap has been cut through there. So I've got all my pattern pieces that are cut now, so I'm ready to start putting it together. I'm using the embroidery thread to stitch the nose onto the snout area, and you can see that the nose, the red nose, is going to cover up that hole that I've cut, and that's where the LED is going to poke through so it can shine through this red fabric here. So I'm using a blanket stitch. You could use any stitch to hold this down. I've just chosen to use a blanket stitch because I like the effect. So all I'm doing is creating a loop going into the red and the brown, and coming up just on the edge of the red, so just into the brown just there, and taking that needle up through into the loop, and it creates a stitch that goes both into the red nose section and around the edge around here. But as I say, you can use any stitch, and you could also stitch this down using an ordinary sewing machine. To create the mouth, I'm just using some black embroidery thread to go around this curve here. I'm using a back stitch. I've used a specialist fabric marker that will come out of the fabric over about 48 hours, so it's an air, disappears in the air. I've just giving that sort of mouth shape. So I'm just doing some little back stitches just around the shape of the mouth. And you can use any shape you like. You've got a shape that's drawn onto the pattern, but you could have it in any shape that you wanted to. The face is now decorated, so I've stitched this snout and the antlers onto the backing layer, so they're not held around the bottom edge, around the sides, they're just held on these sections here with blanket stitches. I've also stitched down the eyes with some little crosses in the centre. They've got 4-hole buttons, and I've just put some embroidery thread with some crosses in. So we're going to attach the circuit to the back here. It's going to go into this section here, and the LED is going to face down into the little hole just there. Just notice that on your paper pattern you do have some information about where the circuit's going to go, so if you get confused you can use the paper pattern to help you identify where your LED is going to go, your cell holder, and where your stitches on your push switch are going to go over here. Doing some small over sewing stitches just to hold the LED into position here, and I've started off with the negative side of the LED. Just notice how the bit that emits the light is facing down into the fabric, just going into that little hole that we've cut out. And what we're going to do is to position the cell holder down here with the battery facing, the entrance for the battery facing down here, because this is where we're going to have a little gap so we can take the battery out to change it if necessary. And we're going to do some little running stitches that go just around the outside to come round to where the cell holder is. It doesn't really matter which of the 2 connection points that I join up to here, as long as I'm joining to the negative side. That's what's the important thing. So this other one can just be used as a stabilising point. On this particular circuit it's not going to be used. So again, I'm just doing some small over sewing stitches to hold the cell holder onto the fabric. Just notice I'm going through this top layer, I'm not going through the snout fabric underneath. The negative side of the circuit is now complete, so I've just started the positive side. So I've got a new piece of thread, so it's a complete different section to this one just here. I've just done some over sewing stitches to hold the positive side of the LED in position, and I've just taken it up to the push switch and done some more over sewing stitches just to hold the push switch in position. There's no positive and negative on here, it's just going to be inserted into the positive side, so it doesn't matter which way around you have this one. Just like the LED, this is facing down towards the fabric. So this is the little bit that will switch the LED on and off, and that's going to face the fabric itself. So from the right side it will push just from here. The circuit's now complete, so you can see that I've done some over sewing stitches to hold the push switch down on the other side, and taken the stitches across to the positive side on the cell holder. Again, just like over here, it doesn't matter which one of these positives that I use. The one that's not used we can actually stitch down just to hold it as a stabilising point. As long as all of the connectors here are joined up to the positives, that's absolutely fine. Just one little map point: when you're holding your push switch down with your stitches, you do need to make sure that the stitches are very tight, but just be wary of having the fabric really sort of holding tight against the switch, because it can depress the switch and mean that it doesn't actually work. It just holds it constantly in an on position. If that does happen, just cut a little bit, a little cross on the other side of your fabric to release the pressure on the push switch, so that it only works when you put your finger on it. So just to reinforce that each of these points, this bit here, and this bit here, are done with separate pieces of thread, and that we've got our negative side and our positive side of the circuit, and it's the positive side that has got our push switch in it. Once the circuit's complete, you can then test it, just taking our cell and sliding it with the positive side facing upwards, and slide it into the cell holder and turn it over, and once we press the cheek you can see the LED lights up. We'll just take our finger off the push switch, it switches off. I'm going to stitch everything together now, so we're going to take our back piece. As I said, this could be any colour. I've chosen to use some brown, and we're just going to place the right sides facing each other, so that all the circuit is tucked away on the inside. You'll need to position these and pin them, and you may need to just trim them just very a little bit, just to make sure that the 2 shapes are exactly the same size. And then we're going to just do some blanket stitch around the edge, just the same as we did here, just to hold these layers together. Before you start your blanket stitch, to go around the edge, don't forget just to pop your little hanger if you're having one, sandwiched in between the two layers. You can do a couple of holding stitches just to hold those in position, and then catch them down with your blanket stitch as you go around the edge. The easiest thing to do is to blanket stitch around the antlers and the sort of top of the head first, leaving the rest of the decoration open, and then just to stuff each of the antlers. It makes it quite hard to get to the antlers if you sew the rest of it together. Just using a knitting needle, or you could use something like a sharp pair of scissors or a pencil, just something thin and pointy basically, just to push the stuffing down into each of the antlers. Obviously, whatever you use to push your stuffing into the antlers, just be careful that the point doesn't go through the fabric, particularly if you're using a pair of scissors. In particular, felt is quite weak, so it will rip quite easily, so just be careful as you're pushing it into these points. The reindeer is sewn together now with the blanket stitches going all the way around the outside edge. At the moment we've still only got the antlers that are stuffed. Just notice that we've got a small hole down the bottom here. Obviously this is where we're going to put the rest of our stuffing inside, but also this is the opening to allow us to access the circuit down the bottom here. So the next stage is to stuff. Again, you can use your little pointing tool, but to stuff the remaining part of the face. We're not going to stuff the whole of the face, we're going to leave this sort of bottom section flat, partly because it's just part of the design, but also because we don't want to put too much pressure on this area here, and we don't want the stuffing to push against the push switch. The very last stage is just to attach the small popper onto the inside of the little hole that you've left, just so that you can close that bottom edge. And there we have a finished reindeer.